Any interest, which you may do now or at any time during the meeting. And then moving on to item 4, approval of the previous meetings. That would be the meeting of August 13th. And the recommendation is that the minutes of the Climate Action Committee meeting held on August 13th be approved. Is there a motion to put that on the table? Thank you, Anne. Any discussion about those minutes? No? Okay, all in favor of approving those minutes? Thank you, and that carries also. No delegations, no correspondence. I don't see anything under staff reports. And public question period, I haven't seen any questions come forward. Brittany or Carly, if you could let me know if that's the case still.
We have not received any questions.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to number 9, 9.1 is a review of the committee work plan. And the most up-to-date version dated August 20th is on the agenda or in the agenda package for your review, along with the appendix to the work plan. As I missed the last meeting, I'm not entirely sure if there was some discussion about updating that. I didn't see much reference to it in the minutes. So, and I don't believe Luke, who is the keeper of the committee work plan, is here. So, is there any discussion on that, the latest version of the work plan or the appendix? Anne?
So just in terms of the appendix, we did talk in the last meeting that was a parking lot place for us to put things that would warrant further discussion, but not kind of at that particular time when it hit the table. So just to make sure that that was clear for people that may not have been at the meeting. My memory of the last meeting was that this was going to be an opportunity to look at the work plan that the committee had put together, with certainly Luke doing the bulk of the work on our behalf, and kind of meld it with how Trevor sees kind of his tasks moving forward. That was kind of, so it's almost a kind of Trevor and our work plan, how they join together is what this agenda item is supposed to look like. So.
Okay, that's actually really helpful, a helpful reminder, and thank you for that, because I recall when we first developed that work plan for the committee, it was becoming increasingly obvious that the committee itself wouldn't be doing all of those items, but that they would be performed by members of staff and or our Trevor, our coordinator. And so maybe that will be a jumping off point of some assistance to Trevor when you go to develop your own work plan. Trevor, is that how you see that working?
So the internal work plan I have developed already, and I'm following that right now. So basically I've placed a work plan over the 2-year contract that I have, and I've added items as it goes along. So, and that is an internal work plan. So me and Steven has, I've given him a preview of what's on there. And as things come out operationally, then, and it's deemed, some of the items there's no need to share with the committee, but if it's deemed that there are some items that we share with the committee, then I would share them. So for example, today I do have some operational updates that I wish to share with the committee. So that work plan goes over the 2 years, and I'm hoping within the committee's work plan, we will decide, or I want to flush out more information as to what the committee anticipates will be a time in which we could submit a final draft to mayor and council. So, and I would like that contained within the committee work plan, and then my internal work plan will match that. And so that way we're working on the same trajectory essentially. And that way I can know what I need to do to get us there.
Any questions for Trevor at this time about that work plan, or is that something you'll be talking to us in more in depth later on, Trevor, when we talk about under new business, the primary focus of the action plan?
Yeah, I'll touch on it a bit. My agenda items kind of go back to, I believe, Luke wanted to flesh out more as to what we were doing in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So my agenda items kind of are around that conversation that we had last week, or not last week, but the last committee meeting. And so I wanted to flesh out more information as to what the committee thought on adaptation and mitigation, where we are and where we should be going, and what effort should we be putting behind mitigation and adaptation.
Okay. Oh, Anne, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I think I heard Trevor say that he wants the committee to give him a timeline as to when the actual plan needs to be completed to go before council. Did I get that right? Is that what you said?
Yes, and that doesn't have to be decided today. We could, I mean, that could be decided in the next committee meeting or the meeting after. I've just gained access, so I had a meeting. I will go, actually, should I do my operational updates now or should I wait?
So can I just comment on that before you move forward? And it may be just all part of the conversation that needs to be had. But I feel that setting a target date for the completed climate action plan needs to be a conversation with you so that we can be realistic. Yeah, like we
totally
need to understand kind of how you see the steps and whether the steps are the same as our work plan that we've already done, or that you want to amend that work plan, but how you see working your way through the steps to a realistic target date.
Yes, and just to clarify, what will go to Mayor and Council will be a final draft. It won't be a completed plan, as Mayor and Council could give it back to the committee for revisions.
Yeah, and I understand that, but in terms of that initial draft preparation, yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I'm 100% with you on that conversation.
Okay, so just to summarize then, and I think I've got this straight, you have a work plan, Trevor, but that's an internal sort of work plan for your reporting to your supervisor, and that is distinct from what we're talking about, which is the climate action plan. And you had mentioned giving us an operational update. I don't see it on the agenda, but is that just falling under one of the new business items, or should I have covered that under staff reports in number 7? I just want to know where that should fall going forward as well.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we could put it under new business. I guess I'm not as structured. I mean, I'm getting used to the structure of these meetings. So I kind of wanted to provide updates, but let's do it within the structure of this. So yeah, let's put it under new business. Okay,
perfect. Yeah, and you know, that's a fair point. I probably run this committee meeting a little too formally, and that likely just reflects my own style, and we could probably relax things a little bit more as we go along, if that's helpful. So no worries at all. We'll cover the operational update under new business. Backing up to the committee work plan, we have the most recent version of that. Sorry, Anne, I see your hands up. Or is that from before? And you're on mute.
Also probably less formal than these committee structures ask for, and tend to want to say something when it comes into my head. Anyway, what came into my head as Trevor was talking was the importance of Steve in this whole process. Steve is supervising Trevor. He's endorsing Trevor's work plan. I would be really interested to hear from Steve in terms of how he envisions this process, and kind of to make sure that our committee vision and the Steve vision, and therefore the Trevor work plan, are all kind of lined up nicely. So I don't know whether that's something that can happen today. Hi, Steve. Or how that works. I just see him as a really important player in this process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
for sure. So Steve, is that something you can respond to now, or how do you want to have a sort of a standing spot under staff reports or updates? Or do you want to just leave it a little more informal than that?
So through you, Madam Chair, to committee today, when we look at our work plans, I look at the operation priority work plan along with Trevor's work plan, and I also look at your council work strategic work plan along also with the climate action work plan, so we can generate a proper go-to document to keep us going. But I would love if you guys want me to do a kind of an update every committee meeting. I'm more than happy to do that. It's whatever the committee would like me to do, and I'll be more than willing to do it.
Thank you. So why don't we include that as sort of a standing item under staff updates? And then if, Stephen, you feel there's nothing to update us on, then that'll be a quick item that we can move past. Brittany, does that sound okay with you in terms of the agenda items?
It does, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that is the committee work plan and the appendix to the work plan. It's there. I imagine Luke will continue, and the committee will continue to give input into updating that, and it's there for Trevor to use as he develops the climate action plan moving forward as well. Okay, mature trees, 9.2. Is the mature trees discussion and the importance of trees. Now, my understanding was that this was on the agenda for last time. Am I wrong about that? Or maybe someone can get, John, I wonder if I could turn it over to you and you can get me caught up on where we're at with this resource.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I also missed the last meeting, so we might need someone who was attended there to update it. But just prior to getting into that, this document, I've prepared it back in the spring with a number of reviews and iterations. So this is kind of the most current one, and it's been shared with a number of groups at this point. And I guess there was wanting to be a review at the last meeting, but without me there, it was deferred.
Gotcha. Are you prepared to speak to this resource, John, and maybe provide some recommendations to committee as to how we might use it within our sphere of influence?
Sure. I think if I went into the document and the preparation of it, it was ended up being a lot of work. And I very importantly worked with two scientists from NRCan that Bob got me connected with. And through that process, and also some feedback from the Grey Sawmill Conservation Authority, it's become quite a rigorous document. It's been used by the Neighborhoods North with the hospital in Owen Sound recently. And just to share the success of that is hospitals decided not to cut down these mature trees to make way for a new parking lot. And so I think the document has already been seen as having some kind of impact on people when they realize the importance of the trees as outlined in point form in the document. The other thing I would speak about is that anyone who looks at all at the IPCC reports and the models that go forward understands that every single one of those 20+ models includes negative emission technologies. And the only one that we know and can develop at scale is planting trees. And so if you think of that in the larger picture, the importance of trees to our future planet and the future health of our globe is going to be critical. And I think, embedding this importance of tree documents in the larger picture of nature-based solutions and negative emissions of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, becomes a really important sort of starting point for having conversations and beginning actions.
Agreed. Yeah, the document itself is incredibly impactful, John, and I can't thank you enough for all the work you did on it. I know I was constantly sending emails asking for this resource and that resource and perhaps wording changes, and probably our own municipal staff can attest to the fact that I'm always looking for the perfect document to send out. So it's fantastic. I note in particular the two questions that come early on first page, or the first page, that ask, it seems to me you're asking council specifically what some of our actions should be in terms of policy development. And so that leads me to wonder how this resource could be used with our own council as well as staff. And I wonder if you have, and beyond that, are there recommendations that you could make?
Sure. When you begin climate action, as we now have, you can set clear targets for the amount of sequestration that you would like to see as part of your overall plan. And building trees in particular into that can be a very important part of going forward. And we can set our own goal. There's no problem in doing that once we know what our baseline emissions are. Or we can use goals that have already been established by larger international groups. One is the Tree Cities of the World group, and you may be aware that Owen Sound has just voted to become a Tree Cities of the World. And I think it's something like 40% canopy cover. So there are metrics that we can use and we can target as we go forward, but these are things that we will want to discuss as a committee.
Agreed. Questions or comments for John? Anne? You're on mute.
Question for the committee as a whole, and that is, I kind of go back to when we asked John to do this work, and I'm not sure when John said he would do it that he realized how much work it was going to be. So thank you so much, John, for taking it on and finishing it. But the reason we asked for it was that it was council was being faced with people cutting down trees on kind of development lots, and then how to respond to that in terms of, kind of replacement and that kind of thing. So the initial plan had been to do some investigation and provide some material for council specifically, I think. And that's kind of my memory as to how it hit the table. And so now that we have it, I guess I wonder about how does it go back to council to get them informed. And I agree with John that it needs to become part of our overall climate plan in terms of where do trees fit and all of that. But I think in the meantime, should we be looking at how to take it back to council, whether it's just as a document to share or whatever venue. And I'm going to ask staff in terms of how do they think that could best be shared with council, so that they can make informed decisions as they're moving forward right now.
Definitely. So I would just add that I think it needs to go out to staff as well, because a document like this can impact several of our departments, right? Like zoning and, our planning department, but also our bylaw enforcement. And the best approach is always an upstream approach. So, there are implications for educating the public and developers, so that we don't have trees cut down in the first place, right? That's what we want to try to prevent. So yeah, part of the overall plan, but also I see this as some low-hanging fruit that we can mobilize sooner rather than later. Over to you, Al.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Anne was correct. Part of the initial sort of impetus for this was there was a subdivision that was being proposed, and the developer had clear cut some land, including trees on the township's right of way. And part of the question was, as council directed our planner to go back and seek some remediation or have some sort of agreement with the developer, was, I guess there was a full inventory of the trees prior to them being cut, and we've got the overall diameter of the trees that were cut, and then we've got in aggregate the total amount of sort of diameter of trees that were cut. And part of the discussion the council had was, how do you remediate that? Do you bring back similar sized trees, which I believe have less of a chance of surviving because they're bigger and more mature, or do you simply plant a majority of smaller saplings that would have a greater chance of survival? But then how do you keep the developer on the hook for maybe 5 or 10 years or whatever it is to ensure that the trees that are replanted simply aren't left to pass away, or to, something happens to them and they don't survive, which then is, our reforestation efforts were fruitless. So that was kind of the impetus behind it, is how do we give our planner enough ammunition to go back to the developer and have a strategy in terms of what they need to replant to make us whole again. And so I understand the document. It certainly tells us the importance of trees and the tree canopy, and it tells us sort of some goals that we could probably try to define with Trevor's help going forward. But from a reforestation or sort of a remediation perspective on those particular lots and on the public property in front of those lots, John, I don't know whether you've got the expertise or the knowledge, but would we be well served to try to replace the trees that were cut down with similar sized trees that would perhaps have a more difficult time of adapting and surviving? Or would we be better off just replanting a whole bunch of smaller trees in the hopes that they all take off and have a better chance of survival over time?
John, do you want to tackle that?
Sure, thank you, Al. This question, the answer again comes back to what our climate plan is going to be. And so if you were willing to cut down a mature maple tree, so I used maples as my example, the sugar maple, because it's the most common tree that we have in our area, you would need to plant 100 young saplings to replace that sequestration in 1 year, based on the calculation. Or you would need to plant 10 trees and then wait 10 years. And so you get a metric. And so it depends on how long are you willing to wait to replace the carbon sequestration that you've now lost by cutting down one mature tree. So that's strictly from a carbon dioxide and sequestration perspective. What it doesn't account for is the water retention loss that you're losing by cutting down that tree, the shading effect, and the cooling and heating effect you get on buildings that are calculated as part of that. It doesn't replace the aesthetic value for people's mental health and well-being when that tree is cut down. And so you can then factor that back in to how long are you willing to wait. If you cut down a forested area, for example, that people were maybe walking through and using as a restorative area, how long would it take till you get that back again? You can answer all those questions. There are models that are available. The iTree model answers a number of these that's used by the U.S. Forest Service. But strictly from a carbon dioxide standpoint, it's you're going to wait 10 years. Well, 10 years, if you planted 10 young saplings and they grew up and they all became very healthy, you again you can put the health of the tree into the models and get these numbers back. But it's about 10 years before you get that back. Well, that's going to take us to 2031. And you look at Canada's goals and even the province's goals, that's just replacing what we're supposed to actually be accelerating to get out of the atmosphere. So you really come down and say, you're not going to cut down those trees. That's what it comes down to. Or you're going to be dedicating a lot of land to get a lot of sequestration in a short number of years in terms of replacing what you've just lost. That's my short answer.
Is that helpful, Al?
Yeah, thank you very much, John, and through you, Madam Chair. So I would suggest that the document certainly be forwarded to our planner, who's in the process of having those discussions with that developer as they are trying to bring something back to council in regards to the negotiations and remediation, but certainly very helpful and something that we probably want to put on our climate action website for sure, so that other people who are interested have knowledge to this information as well. And I like the idea of the setting ourselves some lofty goals in regards to a canopy for Georgian Bluffs. I mean, I think we can certainly be a leader in that area for sure.
Agreed.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's Bob here. I was just wondering if I could add a little bit here to what John was saying. You know, you can't replace a big tree. The root system on those maples, they're shallow feeders, but the root systems will probably extend out to the edge of the crown. So if you look up, you're standing on the ground underneath the tree and you look up into the tree, if the edge of the crown is, say, 50 or 60 feet across, that's a heck of a big root ball. Like, you cannot do that. It just can't be done. So those trees are extremely valuable. It's too bad that there's not a fine in place or something to hit some of these people. You know, you cut down a tree, that's a $10,000 fine. They'll go, what? But, you know, we could put some values to that. But that's what it needs, is some teeth to protect those things, because they cannot be replaced.
Thanks, Bob. And I couldn't agree more. The education and awareness is only going to take you so far. And when it comes to, you know, folks cutting down trees without thinking about it for other perceived benefits, then ultimately there needs to be some stiff penalties and fines. So I don't know exactly what our bylaws say about that, but it's certainly something that we could ask staff to or ask council to take a look at. I'm going to go to our deputy mayor. She's had her hand up for quite a little while. Go ahead, Sue.
Good, thank you. I may be a little off with this one, but we have a parkland dedication that's part of that development process. Why can't we build into that same document something that along that same line, a tree dedication, whereby if a developer is coming in, whether it be for residential or commercial purposes, and they're going to, you know, if we're losing land out of our parkland, then we expect that to be replaced. Why can't we do the same thing somehow with trees? And I know we're working on our official plan for this year. Would that become part of that, or is it part of the zoning bylaws?
Yeah, those
But
are
just
excellent
a thought
points.
that I think that might be an avenue we can approach it from, is to add it right in. So every developer knows that when they're starting, this is part of what they're going to have to do.
Yeah, no, those are good suggestions. Is there a staff member who wants to respond to Sue's comments? Is that something that can be taken forward, Steve or Al?
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly. I will bring it up to our planner, who's working. They're just kicking off. She just had her initial meeting with the consultant who's doing our official plan, and we can certainly look at putting something into every subdivision agreement, not only in terms of a parkland dedication, but a tree replacement dedication, or whatever the terminology is. Why not? Why? I don't see why we wouldn't be able to put something like that. And maybe it's, and if we want to take it seriously, it's maybe for every tree that's cut, you're going to plant another 10 trees somewhere, or whatever that ends up being. And depending on the size of the tree, we can certainly work with something that would make sense. But I'll certainly speak to our planner about putting that in for future consideration, and that she'll work with Trevor on the wording.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks, Sue, for bringing that forward. Brittany, I can't tell. Is your hand up? I see a little yellow thing beside your name. No. Okay. Bob, your hand is up. Is that from previous, or did you have more to add?
I'm sorry, that's from previous. I've got to get used to this. Sorry.
No worries. Anyone else? Questions or comments about taking this forward? So, Brittany, do you feel like we have a committee recommendation or a few recommendations that are coming out of this discussion? Are we looking, committee, at sending this to council, and how? I guess I'm wondering, what mechanism are we going to use? Are we going to email it to council? Does someone want to come and do a presentation regarding this this tool for council? How is it that we want that information delivered? Any suggestions? Anne?
I tend to be really visual, and as you were saying that, I was envisioning the Georgian Bluffs logo that is behind Dwight's head, and in the meetings, and I think there's a good sized tree in that image, isn't there? And I wonder what that logo would look like if we chopped that tree down and plastered 100 little ones on it, and whether that would get the message across.
Yeah, that would be an interesting visual for sure. Yeah, definitely something to consider as well. Bob?
Yeah, this is something. I'm holding up a piece of wood here. This is actually a sugar maple, and it has staining in it from tap holes. I cut it down. This tree died of Utapella canker, which is a disease that attacks maples. Snapped off in the bush this winter, and I cut it down for firewood. I noticed the stain patterns from the tapping. So a friend of mine, we cut slabs and then we made them into trivets, right? So this isn't a very big piece of stuff. It's probably about a foot wide. And I was just counting the tree rings on it here. That tree would be about 100 years old. Not very big. We've got trees here a lot bigger than that are a lot older than 100 years old. They sequester a lot of carbon, and it takes a long time to grow those things. That's just off the escarpment here on our bush, just north of Kemble.
Interesting. There's a good visual. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you know, I not to sound like a broken record, but I think there's still a lot of misinformation out there about fixing the problem by planting a bunch of saplings. And I think our committee gets it, right? But, you know, it's information that Joe Public and even Joe Councillor doesn't always have. And so I think it's worthwhile to provide this information to council. My worry is if we just include it as information in the agenda package, is that it's going to be skipped over, because with hundreds of pages to read, that's just naturally what happens. So do we want it included in a package where someone from the committee is able to speak to it, or is that something Sue and I could draw to people's attention and have a discussion about it as council, just to raise awareness? I'm really trying hard not to volunteer John to come and present on this document. John, you get stuck with a lot of work sometimes. Deputy Mayor Sue, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering if, when our minutes from this meeting come forward to council, if we don't pull those off consent agenda and just address that it's something we're considering, is looking at having some kind of tree replacement bylaw that matches that parkland dedication, and just highlight it in that manner to the rest of council. And then that perhaps reinforces direction to staff in that regard as well.
Yeah, good suggestion. I like that. Thank you. Other comments? John?
I was wondering, and this is just an idea, that instead of presenting the document to council and trying to explain to them, where we're coming from with this in detail, to instead make a presentation to council that we would want to hold an open public information session, of which we would then discuss the importance of trees document. So simply asking council's approval to have a public session and then take it from there, and then getting that feedback from the public and building on that.
Thoughts on that, folks? Danuta is saying thumbs up. Bob?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Get people engaged with it and see what people think about it.
So a public forum, some kind of additional presentation aside from a council meeting is what you're suggesting, John?
Yeah, exactly. Although I don't know how you hold these public sessions these days, but maybe we can actually have an in-person one. I'm not sure. Where are we with that?
Brittany will certainly answer that, but I imagine she's going to say, stay tuned. With the fourth wave being predicted for September, with the back to school timing, who knows? I'm hesitant as a council member right now to suggest we have anything in person in case we go back to having more limits indoors, but I'll turn it over to Brittany on this one.
Thank you, Chair Coburn. So first, in regards to the structure of open houses, we are still doing them virtually, given the likely increase in numbers that we're seeing, as well as gathering restrictions that are still in place. So we are hosting them virtually. We can do it fairly informally and just make the links available and have a type of drop-in session and have people come by and ask questions, come by, quote unquote, just come by the meeting and ask questions of this committee. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to host rather than a specific public information session just regarding the trees document, if there's an opportunity to expand that, whether that's, later on this fall and have a general climate action public information session, as in, this is what we're doing. We're also thinking of having this trees document prepared and circulated, and working in some wording into our bylaws regarding tree retention and etc. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to have a wider information session rather than just specifically regarding this tree document.
Yeah, that's a good point. It fills me with a little bit of trepidation doing that this early, as we heard from the CAO from Huron-Kinloss, sort of trying to bring everybody on board right off the hop is can in fact stall the process. Because if folks don't fully understand what it is that we're trying to achieve, then there can be a lot of backlash. So I think it would have to be structured pretty carefully, and I will turn it over to Trevor now for his comments.
Sure. I like where Brittany is going in her comments. So rather than expending the currency of the committee on one issue, because of the passion about this subject I can feel amongst the committee, I would say within a climate plan, this would be a special consideration within the climate plan. The climate plan is not going to have, I would say, from an administrative point of view, it's not going to have the legal backing to enforce anything. It would be more likely to serve as guidance, whether we choose to get a resolution from council or for council to adopt the plan, and that would be up to mayor and council as to what in which they would want to do. So I do see us expending a lot of resources right off the bat on a single action item. I mean, even if it fell under a special consideration, we're talking only about maybe a paragraph within the plan, and all the other actions that we need to come up with. I think those we cannot, obviously, over the period of time that we have, we cannot equally dedicate time to each and every action. And I don't want to expend our currency in that sense right off the bat personally, but I do see how this is a very passionate issue, and it's an issue that touches within a municipality many different departments. And I just wanted to say that my department, it does fall under Steve, but Steve manages the operations department. So I'm one component of that department. And I'm in a very unique opportunity where I get to sit on operations meetings with Steve, and I get to see what's happening within the other parts of operation. And climate coordinators do not always have that unique opportunity. And so this is a very special case in which I do. So, and I can see how this issue that we're discussing right now will touch on many other parts of operations. So I don't know if it would be the best thing right now to just put out one single issue unless we framed it around other issues relating to the climate plan. And I just want to add one more thing. Just in terms of, I hear this getting on board or converting people. I don't think within the frame of time we don't have time to convert people or get people on board. I think we have to engage the community, find out what their priorities are, and then figure out how they link in with our climate change priorities. Right here, I see within this group an importance of trees and preserving the landscape and protecting the ecological integrity. So that would definitely be in a climate plan. And then the fact that all the work has been done to develop this tool would also be an action within that plan and a recommendation. But also we haven't heard from the community as a whole as to what other issues are maybe equally or more important to them as well.
Thank you. No, those are good points. So, and I think we do need to be careful that we don't put the cart before the horse. Even going out to the public and asking what their priorities are before we've done a proper baseline and an emissions inventory. Most folks aren't going to have that knowledge sort of at their fingertips. They may say, well, agriculture is important to me, or forests are important to me, or erosion is a concern for me. But until we do that data collection and an emissions inventory, that kind of data is what's going to help guide this process as well. And I think it's super important. Hopefully we can get talking to that a little later on in the agenda as well, Trevor, is the collection of data that we need so that we can say to the public, here are the areas that we're doing well in, here are the areas that need some work. And without that, I don't even have a good sense for that. So I imagine most people don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense through you, Councillor Coburn, Chairperson. Yeah, I completely agree.
Okay, thank you. Sue, did you have something to add here?
I did. I agree that going out to a public meeting right now on sort of a one issue type thing, I don't think we'd get the interest in it. I also think doing it as a virtual again, people are getting tired of it. So looking ahead and seeing maybe in 6 months' time, we can actually get people together in a public forum such as Shallow Lake Arena type thing. I actually see, I think it was Anne commented about our logo for the township where we have a visual of that big tree cut down and replaced with a whole bunch of small trees. And that's one part of a public meeting that it's like an exhibit that people go and they get information on. And we have a whole bunch of things like that. The erosion on the shorelines, where we invite people out to get more information when we're 6 months into getting more data ourselves, and at a point when people are ready to get out in public and see people face to face. And that might be part of the attraction, part of the draw to get people there. So I think some careful planning for a public meeting like this or for this maybe we have a parking lot for what are the issues we would bring forward and display at that meeting. So I like the idea of not doing a public meeting based on one issue by Zoom, but putting it off till a later date and having more issues presented. So just my thoughts. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Other comments? Okay, Anne, and then we'll go on to Brittany. Hopefully she can summarize this discussion for us.
Yeah, thank you, Brittany. If you can do that, that's amazing. My comment was, I mean, I think it's wise to be really, really careful in planning a public meeting and the timing, because you don't get that opportunity frequently. So you've got to do it right. And it's good, and they've got to go away feeling like, oh yeah, I could do that, or yeah, that makes sense. We don't want them going away kind of confused or disgruntled. So that really requires some good planning. The other part of my comment that I wanted to make, and that is, obviously, by the length of the conversation on trees are really, really important in the hearts of this committee. And it sounds like there's opportunities that both staff and council can actually take that information and start using it now, that they don't have to wait until the completion of our draft plan. And I guess I don't want to lose that, if there are things that planners can be doing, or that the works people can be doing, or decisions council members could be making now based on this information that we've got, I'd like to see that happen now.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. I agree. That's what I was referring to as the low-hanging fruit. So this is one of those pieces that we don't have to wait for a comprehensive plan to start to at least raise awareness, if not put some policy in place. Brittany, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. So while I am not going to necessarily attempt to summarize everything that we've discussed here today, I think I can hit the high points. So it sounds as though, one, we are not ready to have a public meeting tailored strictly to trees, which I think is a good call on the committee's part. So we will definitely include that as a priority item, as Trevor has discussed, in the general plan. However, in dealing with this item that we have in front of us today, I think we have a few options to get it in front of council, as well as staff, and as well as the public as well. So one, as Deputy Mayor Carlton outlined, it will form a part of these minutes and then be presented to council via a consent agenda, at which time it may be pulled for highlighting to the rest of council and the public as well. I think in conjunction with that, we can also share it with staff and potentially share it with council prior to that point as well, as to get the conversations going. So 2 points. Third, I think we can also upload it as a resource to your climate action portal in order to get the public thinking about how they can prioritize trees and get them thinking about the climate action profile as well. We can do a little bit of a media campaign around it, get it out to the wider general public, not just that on the website. We can put it on social media, share it with local media outlets as well, as to get the conversation going. So I think that's how we move forward at this point, while bearing in mind that trees and replanting, etc., will also form a general larger topic in the climate action planning process.
Fantastic. I like all those suggestions. Is everyone in agreement with those recommendations that Brittany has outlined? Sounds good? Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Brittany. All right. Anything more regarding the tree document and the strategy? If not, we'll move on. And thanks again, John. Your expertise and the amount of work and effort you put into this is invaluable, and we all appreciate it very much. Okay, so moving on to new business. Trevor, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the 2 points listed in our agenda there, and also to incorporate your operational update within that as well. Thank you.
Right, so through you, Madam Chair, operational updates. Yeah, I just want to put this out there just because I'm not, just for full transparency and accountability as to what I'm doing on a weekly to week basis. So yesterday I had a welcome call with FCM and ICLEI. FCM is the logistical support for PCP and ICLEI is the technical support for PCP. ICLEI also administers BARC solely through ICLEI. So I did not have a call about BARC, it was about PCP, in which they provided me with a lot of resources in which I will take some time to go through. And that is why it is not on the agenda today. I know there's some excitement about being enrolled in PCP, and I'm excited as well. But I would like to present it in a way that it's a lot of information. I like to present it in a way that makes sense to the committee, and I'm comfortable with it as well. So I now have access to the PCP tool and the PCP hub. For the ICLEI BARC, if anybody's wondering, we're just awaiting confirmation. And I was supposed to have a meeting with Grey County with their manager of climate change initiatives this afternoon. It will be actually on Thursday. And a lot of things that I'm doing internally, I've been holding off for that meeting to see what kind of commitment we can get from Grey County in terms of resources. They are embarking on their PCP milestones as well. I see, but they operate at a very higher level and a broader scale. And so if there is resources that they can commit to the operations as to what we're doing and to support the work that's going on here, I would like to hear that first. If there isn't as much of a commitment as we would like there to be, then that's something I would need to know before I deliver information to the committee. Is there any questions in terms of that operational update?
I have one, if I may. So I think it's great that we're trying to collaborate with Grey County. I do see it as a bigger machine, and perhaps the wheels may turn a little more slowly. I don't know. I could be wrong about that. How long do we wait, Trevor, or do you have a sense for how long it will take for you to get a notion from them as to what resources they can logistically provide? How long do we wait before we just kind of forge ahead with our own plan?
I mean, if initial conversations didn't happen this week, my operational work plan, I can just keep going as I have been doing. I've been just keeping going. So and then if that conversation happens, a week to 2 weeks from now, then we've still made strides forward on what we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, thank you. Anne?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to Trevor, I have spoken to Scott Taylor, their chief planner, and he actually presented to the Georgian Bluffs Climate Action Team. And he's very committed to sharing Georgian Bluffs data that was gathered in the collection of data for the development of the Grey County plan. And so that might be really, really useful to specifically ask for. They did it for all of the municipalities, and they should be able to peel off the stuff specific to Georgian Bluffs. And it may help within the emissions inventory as well.
Yes, thank you, Anne, and through you, Madam Chairperson, to Anne. I do have a list of asks, and that would be very high on the top of the list of asks from the county.
Perfect. Good suggestion. Thank you, Anne. Any other questions or comments regarding Trevor's operational update? I don't see any at this time, Trevor, so carry on.
Sure. At this time, I'd like to just share my screen. And you can all see my screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I introduced in the agenda just two kind of materials. Just going off of what I believe Luke was saying last week as to how much effort we put into mitigation and adaptation. And then also there was a question of energy planning. The first article was from the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices, and it was just kind of speaking to the optimism of the IPCC report. I prefer to go in an optimistic direction rather than the doom and gloom direction. Usually when I'm going through materials, I try to maintain that as much as possible. So in this first article, there was a big emphasis for mitigation, as well saying that climate change is already happening. So one could kind of say that we should be adapting, and how much we should be doing adaptation. So I was wondering if anybody had read that and they had any comments in terms of what was in the article.
Go ahead, Danuta.
Thank you, Chair Coburn. I certainly read that, and I feel that it's that mitigation needs to be addressed at least with adaptation, and that perhaps they can be addressed at the same time. But to look only at adaptation and not look seriously at mitigation, I think that it's not. I think it has to be a dual effort in order for us to be successful, because a lot of it involves changing our practices, not just making concessions on how we live. It's actually working with the situation and being proactive, both in making adaptation plans, but also in reducing emissions. So I still think that that's really important and needs to be a focus, because it really targets the consumptive ethic. I don't know if I got the right word, which has led us to this point. In any case, that might be a little bit naive of me, but I feel I wanted to make that case for that. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that makes sense. Other remarks regarding the article? I know when I read it, Trevor, I like to read things that are hopeful too, but it seems to me in reading these kinds of articles that the hope is all predicated upon doing something. So, I mean, it's great to be hopeful, but there is no hope if you don't do anything. And so I agree with Danuta. It's clearly it's not enough just to adapt anymore. And I think I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but I would say this committee has been committed to the mitigation side as much or even more so perhaps than the adaptation side from the get-go. So I definitely don't get a sense from this committee that it's just about adapting. And I please correct me if I'm wrong, or feel free to add to that. Anyone else on the committee? Anne?
Yes, I agree, Madam Chair. The hope in that report is completely based on action. If there's no action, there's no hope. And the action has to involve mitigation. We have to reduce emissions. Yes, we have to do adaptation when necessary, but to really be hopeful, we have to reduce emissions.
Thank you. And Danuta, your hand is up. Is that from previous? Sorry, I just don't want to miss you. Thank you. Other folks? Sue?
Thank you. When I read that one, I actually thought someone who maybe doesn't understand the seriousness of what we're facing would take that article to say, oh, everything's pretty okay. We don't really need to worry about things. So I think it treats everything too lightly. And if too many people read that, they're going to go, I don't think we need to worry about anything, and they're not going to take it serious. So that was just kind of my fear when I read it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If you're just reading the headline, it's it's a slightly misleading without digging a little deeper and seeing that. Sure, it's hopeful that global warming is reversible, but the other part of that is if we act fast. So other comments, or does that give you enough of a flavor of where the committee's coming from based on that article, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, I was one of 58 coordinators under the MCIP program with FCM. So when I went to conferences, adaptation is still quite taboo. So for example, at a conference out of the 58, there might have been 16 of us working on adaptation, and then the rest of the individuals would be working on mitigation. So I'm used to being in an environment where mitigation is the be all and all, and then adaptation is kind of fighting for a voice to get resources in the room, because it seems like everything is tailored towards mitigation. And I believe all the points that you brought up, the committee had brought up, are very accurate. And I would say if we surveyed individuals throughout the country, that those same points would probably come up as well.
Yes, thank you. So a message in the chat area, and typically we avoid using the chat function in our meetings, but I'll let Brittany advise us if that's still okay, or if that's okay in a committee scenario, just because it's difficult to capture that sometimes as part of the official minutes. But regardless, Anne has said code red needs to be included in the message. Does that comment ring true for you, Trevor?
I would have to. I do believe that the severity has to be communicated. What is the best way to communicate that severity without, as John speaks about, and we watched in the movie Resilience, how severe can we go before people start turning off to the message? So, and I'm always cautious of that, just because it can be overwhelming. Even I've worked in this field for now, I believe I'm going on my 3rd year, and working solely on climate change, and I get overwhelmed at times as well. So I'm just always trying to tailor that communications message to really communicate, one, the severity, but to what we should be doing or looking at doing as well, and what are the barriers to prevent us from doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think you can talk doom and gloom only without offering people some hope based on some actions. Go ahead, Anne.
And that was the point I was trying to make in my chat, and that is, if I agree with Sue that if you just look at the Canadian Institute for Climate Choice article, it almost leaves you feeling like, well, we're good, right? And that's where the joint message of, you know, we could be good if we really focus on doing good things. If we don't focus on those things, then we may not be good. In fact, it's likely we won't be good. And I agree with you, Trevor. We have to come up with positive stories, hopefulness, things that people can feel are doable within their own kind of lives and within their own municipality. Those stories, those opportunities for change really need to be front and center as well. But people do need to get that we're kind of there now. We really do need to start making some change. We can't just continue talking about it.
Thank you. Yeah, those are good points. John?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to add to that, I think from an urgency perspective, I think something that we might want to consider and talk more about is the concept of exponential growth. And I think because of the pandemic, most people have a much better idea about what exponential growth is, as we've seen the first wave, the second wave, the third wave, and now the fourth wave. You've seen these numbers. And if we look at the climate models and the climate models for our region, this is something I've talked a lot about when I've been lecturing at the college. The number of hot days is increasing exponentially. When I was a young boy growing up, we had 2 days a year, and now it's 6, and then it's going to be 10, and then it's going to be 20. And so it's that concept of we're just at the beginning of the flex, if you like, of many of these metrics that are being modeled. And I think that also speaks to the urgency of both adapting, because we're locked in for centuries of climate change, and also mitigation, so that we minimize what those changes are to the extent that we can. So I think that's, to add to that conversation, there's some solid numbers behind the reason for why we should be concerned at this point, and they can be expressed quite easily if we want to do that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think back to the social messaging around driving under the influence. Initially, they took sort of the doom and gloom approach, right? They showed mangled cars and, people in hospital and hooked up to machines. And what they found from that approach is that the scare tactics aren't necessarily all that effective. And so we do, I hear Trevor when he says we have to have an approach that, I'm not going to say a balanced approach, because it's not balanced, but we do have to, be careful that we're not instilling so much fear that people become paralyzed by it. So yeah, I think what I do hear coming from this conversation is that mitigation is important. And Trevor, I know your work experience has been based on adaptation. But you feel confident that we can move forward with a plan that also includes mitigation, and that would start with an emissions inventory. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to flush out right now. I think from the previous committee meeting, I think mitigation was going to be at least 70 and adaptation, let's say 30. And then there was some question as to energy planning and where that would be within the plan. I would say, just starting off with this conversation, I believe mitigation is probably still maybe even 75, and adaptation might be 25 of the plan. And I mean, that may change over time as we go through this process, but that's kind of what I'm feeling. I think I was kind of worried that maybe mitigation would completely push out adaptation through this process. I don't think that's the case, and I think we kind of see that because we are in the middle of what's going on, that some adaptation will be required, and that's kind of what I'm just getting in the feel for here.
Okay, good. I'm glad that discussion is helpful then. John, I see that your hand is raised. No, oh, from before. Okay, so sorry. I should do a better job of watching for that. Okay, Trevor, so that's, does that give you enough on the first new business item, what the primary focus of the township is? And would you like to move on to the second part of that?
Yeah, it's definitely. So I included what I had formed with the steering committee. So the committee that I had was different from your committee. It was not a formal committee of council, but a community committee, and it was composed of stakeholders. So I noticed in this committee, many of the members have very similar, I guess, interests and passions, and belong to similar, I guess, outside organizations. Whereas the steering committee I had was composed of, let's say, for example, somebody from Parks Canada, somebody from the Churchill Northern Studies Center, and so on. So we did, I think, so it kind of differed in that sense, and I should just just wanted to clarify that. So, and again, it wasn't solely me that put this together. It was from the help of the committee. And so we did look at adaptation versus mitigation and why we chose adaptation. And I'm not making the case and saying, okay, Township of Georgian Bluffs has to choose adaptation. I completely agree with the split that we're currently at, because the township does have those resources to implement mitigation. And this was just basically, I know I'm preaching to the choir and everybody knows these adaptation and mitigation, but I just wanted to clarify why a northern community with limited resources in the north, which is warming at 3 times the global rate, was choosing adaptation. And I also kind of wanted to flesh out in this, through reading this, the word resilience and what that means, and how mitigation and adaptation equal resilience. And for the north, because the resources aren't there to fully implement mitigation, they are relying on the south to implement mitigation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that makes their adaptation efforts much more fruitful rather than they won't be able to adapt. So, and that was kind of what I was trying to showcase in this. And I don't know if other individuals felt the same or different, but that's kind of where I was going.
Any comments so far on this for Steve? Resilience and adaptation. I think you're right to point out the differences here with the town of Churchill, Steve. I think you know, it's when it comes to climate action planning, one size does not fit all. We're lucky where we live because we have, as you say, we do have the resources. And yeah, so I think that to a certain extent will guide for us the path forward, including the mitigation piece for sure. Any comments or questions for Trevor? Did you want to talk to us, Trevor, about the maturity, the FCM maturity scales?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairperson. So just the whole premise of this was to just look at both mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, and just keep the idea of resilience in mind, and then look at the maturity scales and look at where we are and where we would like to go. So I just wanted to show this is a 2-year time frame here. So my contract start date, middle of contract, and contract end date. And this committee might continue on beyond my contract. But just in the time frame that I'm here, what I'm capable of doing in that time frame, and then kind of keep that in mind as we look at the maturity scales. So I will bring up one of them. So this is the maturity scale for greenhouse gas emission reduction. And I believe Councillor Coburn went through this process. I believe you went through this process before. So you have to determine a starting level or where you're starting at. So in FCM, before you embark on anything, they have you do these maturity scales, and they want to see how much progress you've made in the terms of the maturity scale. So here you have a concept level, a milestone 1, a milestone 2, milestone 3, milestone 4, and milestone 5. And so some municipalities are only at the concept level. Councillor Coburn shared some notes with me, and she made some really good points that I'd say in some regards we're at milestone 1 or milestone 2, but then we have to determine how far are we willing to go, and is that something that the climate plan is going to take us to? So is the climate plan going to take us 10 years from now? And is that going to get us to milestone 5? Is the climate plan going to take us 5 years from now and get us to milestone 4? in terms of these competencies. And that's just something that we have to, I think, decide together, maybe not right here, right now. This is just kind of an introduction, but I will be sitting down and going through these and looking at the evidence of where we are at in terms of our milestones for mitigation and adaptation. And I was wondering if anybody had looked through these and kind of had any questions for, let's say, the greenhouse gas emission one.
Yeah, any comments for Trevor? Danuta?
Well, thank you, Trevor, for sending these. And I, when I scanned through, I think we're at the very first little block on each single one. But I guess, perhaps we already have, as you said, data from Grey County, so maybe we're a little bit further forward, and I was underestimating how much progress we may have already made. But basically, as far as what they call boots on the ground, I think that it's not, we should be very soon, and perhaps I feel as if we need to really start making, as you say, you're asking for targets, for timelines, and we really do need to set those, and we don't have a lot of information on which to base that yet, except apart from what other municipalities have already done. And I know that here on Kinloss established an 18-month time frame, I think it was, that they had over developing their climate action plan, which was very ambitious. So it may be worthwhile looking back at some of that. But I think developing a time frame and moving forward on these is very important.
I agree. Those are good points. Thank you, Danuta. I know when I did the maturity levels scales for the FCM leadership course, and I suspect Deputy Mayor Carlton also did, I did not place us at milestone 1 because I wasn't aware that we have an inventory of greenhouse gas emissions specific to Georgian Bluffs. Now, maybe we do have that data through Grey County, which would put us more into that, but I landed us for mitigation solidly under the concept level, just simply based on the fact that I didn't think we had any an inventory in place. And I think that's really important. So if just without being able to see your previous slide then, Trevor, it looks like you are, your perception is that you'll be able to get milestone 3 and milestone 3 completed by the end of your stint with us, so that at the end of that time we'll have done the emissions inventory, set our emissions targets, and have a local action plan in place to guide the municipality. Is that correct?
That is the aim. So I have read over the RFP. I didn't want to bring up the RFP because I believe it's extremely time consuming right now. And I think there needs to be a dialogue about it specifically, maybe on the next agenda. But I have reviewed it, and in my conversation with FCM yesterday, they've provided me with a RFP that will get us to be abiding by their milestone 1 to 3. So, and that will have to be incorporated in our current RFP. And but that is the goal, that is the aim. And I don't feel comfortable talking about the RFP in full right now, but I just wanted to mention that point.
Okay, yep, that's helpful. Thanks for clarifying. Other questions, Anne?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. I think there does need to be a conversation in terms of before an RFP is finalized, what goes into the RFP. And I know that a training that Kathy, Danuta, and I think from this committee took with PCP around milestone 1, the feeling from PCP was that milestone 1 could probably be completed by a climate action coordinator and in-house. It didn't require consultants on board to do that part of it. So I don't know whether now is the time to have that discussion or when that might be.
Thanks for that reminder, Anne, and you're right, I could pull my notes from that specific webinar that we attended, but you're right, I do recall them saying that's something that can be done in-house and fairly quickly. Is that, Trevor, is that something that you want to discuss now, or are you indicating that you'd prefer to bring that to the next meeting?
I would prefer to bring it to the next meeting. This meeting is just, I titled it quantifying the committee's level of ambition. So, and I feel that the committee is very ambitious and motivated, but that needs to be quantified within the structure of the municipality and the administration and the Department of Operations. And how do we quantify that? So, and I believe that these maturity scales are a good way to quantify that, because then it gives us, for example, are we at the competency level, concept level for policy? Would we like to be at the milestone level 3? And what time frame would we like to be working on that? And I think that brings it back to working within the municipality, because I feel ambition is a very hard thing to measure, and it's very hard to quantify. So, and that's the attempt here.
Anne?
Thank you, Chair. In my experience in setting kind of targets, part of setting targets is breaking the targets into steps, which I think these milestones do really nicely. These are steps. And, the first step is doing your inventory. Then the next step involves setting your emission reduction targets and kind of, so it really breaks it down nicely. I would be way more comfortable setting time targets for step 1, milestone 1, than trying to project forward in terms of what's the target for milestone 3, 4, or 5, and kind of work our way there as we see how the work evolves. I mean, yes, a nice end game would be that you're 18 months into the contract, we've got a draft plan, we're taking it to council, and we're actually starting to look at implementation. But personally, I'd like to see a target for milestone 1 as we're doing the other targets.
So, so you're saying breaking down those milestones and having targets within each of those, Anne? Yeah, Trevor, or Steve or Al, how are you feeling about that suggestion?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would suggest that that's the prudent course of action. I think Trevor would do that regardless, in terms of, he would set up, I'm sure, a Gantt chart and try to, if that's the milestone, he would have a series of steps that he would sort of be building on to get to the end road. He'd build himself a roadmap to get there. So I think it goes without saying that that's what he would be doing to achieve those milestones. But I don't want to put words in Trevor or Steve's mouth, but if I was the project manager and I was working on accomplishing these goals and these milestones, that's what I would do, is a series of building blocks to get me there.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm just trying to formulate sort of the underlying thought here is that, and maybe this is very basic, but we're looking for deliverables. We'd love to see timelines. If we can get milestone 3 accomplished by the end of your contract, Trevor, I think we'd all be, I particularly feel myself that I'd be very happy with that. And whatever we can do to help, I guess, along the way as a committee, we're happy to do that. So will we come back to the discussion about the RFP, and that was specifically for the emissions inventory Trevor, or are you getting a sense that that's something that is something that could be done in-house? Or do you just need more time to think about that?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Those are all good points. And as Al has said, there's a lot of minutia in this that, for example, like just planning that roadmap, there is a lot of administrative hurdles to go through. I don't think that the committee has to be made aware of all of them, just because it is administrative and it's something that I do almost automatically now. But just having these tangible goals in front of us and these milestones, I think, is a huge help in visualizing where we want to be going. And Anne made a good point, as well as having that greenhouse gas emissions inventory in place. And then, as you have pointed out, would we want to do this in-house, or the RFP? And I think that would be kind of the broader discussion that we need to have. If, for example, if it went into the RFP, we would want the consultant to get us from the concept level or milestone 1 to milestone 3, and that would be kind of that goal of that RFP. And but there's just one more point I wanted to end off on, and then I guess we could maybe make a plan for that in the next agenda.
So, okay, so I guess I'm maybe needing some clarification, perhaps even from our senior staff here. I didn't realize that we would be considering putting an RFP out for someone to accomplish milestones 1, 2, and 3. So clearly I don't understand, maybe as well as I should, your role here, Trevor. And I wonder, am I the only one on the committee who's confused about that? And if so, I'll have a chat with Al or Steve or Trevor later on. But I guess what I'm asking is, are we hiring someone to take us through these milestones? And if so, what's your role in all of that then, Trevor? I see Steve's hand is up. Go ahead, Steve.
Through you, Madam Chair, to committee, can we bring this back to the staff level first, and we'll bring something back to the next climate action committee, and we can present something a little bit more tangible and understanding of what next steps are going to be taken here through the milestones and where we're going to go for these projects. So if we could just kind of bring it offline for a bit for myself and Trevor and Al and the Madam Clerk to sit down and go through it, then we can kind of bring something forward at the next climate action committee, if that's okay.
Yeah. No, that's very reasonable. Thank you, Steve. That's a good suggestion. Okay, Trevor, I'll just turn the floor back to you then. I'm not sure if you have all of the information you're needing at this time, or if there's anything else you wanted to update committee on.
I just want to leave on one more point, and as well, I'm just laying a foundation here to get us to the point where we do have that final draft plan. What you have brought up is something it has been gone into consideration and has been talked about internally, and is something that we need to finalize as to how we're going to go forward. And I think I will talk to the senior managers as well and figure that out, and we'll be able to have that conversation. I just wanted to leave on one more point. And I don't mean to confuse any further as to what we have been discussing. But so we've established that there are milestones for mitigation, but there are also milestones for adaptation. And we don't have to, within where we want to go with the plan, say, for example, okay, we've kind of established that we want to be at milestone 3 for greenhouse gas emission reduction. Adaptation, we may only want to go to preliminary level or milestone number 2. Or we might want to be really ambitious and go to 3 or even go to 4 in some cases. So, and that's something that I just trying to gauge from the committee as to how far we're going to go on the adaptation side as well.
Yeah, that's a fair question. So I'm gonna let the rest of the folks think about it, and I'm going to throw something out there if I may. If we're committing to adaptation as well, I don't see these steps as so for example, I don't understand why we would just go to step 2 and develop policy and have some strategic guidelines if there's no intent to implement them. So I think if we're committing to doing some adaptation, we likely have to move through all of these steps at some point anyway. Am I making sense? So I mean, as a council, we wouldn't develop policy and strategic direction and then say, but like, don't worry about it. We don't need to enact that. We don't need to put it into practice. So are you just talking about timelines then, Trevor, or are you asking us how are you asking us how much of this we want to commit to at all?
Through you, Madam Chairperson, to the committee, we have committed to ICLEI BARC, which is the adaptation side of things. So we've embarked on a journey with the PCP milestones, and then we're also embarking on another journey, which I don't think is separate. I think the two journeys coincide with each other quite well, with the ICLEI BARC and going through the adaptation. So, and it's just a matter of how ambitious do we want to be. It is free of charge to join PCP milestones, and you don't even have to finish a milestone. For example, obviously that's not the case here. We are very ambitious. We want to get to milestone 3. And as well with ICLEI BARC, there is that financial commitment. But if a municipality loses its motivation to embark on those ICLEI BARC milestones, that could also as well fall by the wayside. And as well, we know some external factors are happening right now. A federal election is happening right now, and a fourth wave from the pandemic. And so those are externalities that could affect how fast and how far we can move. And so I just want to make sure that that's quantified as to what we intend to do here.
Okay, thank you. Comments from committee. Anne?
Yeah, so I just wanted clarification. Trevor, are you suggesting, and I'm wondering, does this make sense, that we proceed on the mitigation plan, therefore milestone 1, that we wait for the results of the election, which is really not that far away, to put out the $20,000 to join BARC, and then kind of have a discussion to see whether the election has any implications for where we're moving here? I'm not quite sure when you brought the election up, what you were suggesting we do with that. I guess it's yeah.
Can you I guess I thought we had already applied for BARC and we were just waiting to hear back, but apparently I'm confused about that too. So Trevor, I wonder if you can answer Anne's question.
To my knowledge, I've confirmed that we have applied for BARC and we were just waiting on confirmation. ICLEI was on the call yesterday. ICLEI wears 2 hats in this, where they provide the technical support to PCP and they also administer the BARC program. And they weren't able to confirm at that time just because it's within a different department. But I do believe we're just waiting for confirmation. So, and I see us. That's why I'm just saying that based on the milestones that are presented in front of us, that we're at a very similar starting point on both of them. So it would be wise to start working on both. I do recognize that there is, I would say, a greater ambition to really hit the goals with mitigation, but I'm just kind of trying to gauge here how much planning resources in the time frame that we have should go also into adaptation.
Yeah, no, that's for sure a fair question. I would hazard a guess that we're already doing quite a bit in terms of adaptation. That information, of course, would come from our operations department. We maybe don't call it adaptation, but even, you know, just improving, when I've spoken to Mr. Dahlmeyer, improving the drainage along certain roads to help mitigate the impacts of flooding. To me, that would be part of this. I think we need to look at what we're already doing and where we need to move things forward a little bit. I personally think we have to embark on both of these simultaneously, and I would love for us to get to levels 3 or even level 4 of the adaptation steps as well. I don't know if I'm off base or if that's too ambitious, but how about we go to Al next? I see your hand is raised, Al.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to try to bring this dialogue, I guess, closer to conclusion, I think the purpose today was for Trevor to try to get a feeling from the committee members in terms of where to place some of his focus on. I think he's got some of that now. To what extent, I'm not sure, but I think what I would recommend is that for the next committee meeting, is that Trevor and Steve will come back with a draft work plan so that council can, or that this committee can be focused on exactly where Trevor's going to be focusing his attention to, some of the deliverables, some of those milestones, and then that would form the basis of really where we're going forward with this committee on a monthly basis so that we can track the progress. We've defined the roadmap and we're providing this committee with updates on exactly how we're going with it, whether it's an RFP, whether it's work that's being in-house. That'll all be defined in the work plan. The committee can take a good look at it, and then that will then focus conversation moving forward on implementing the goals of that work plan and how we're going forward. So today was really sort of just a high-level umbrella to try to get a feeling so that Trevor could get a sense in terms of where his priorities should lie. I think he's got some of that to some extent, and I suspect that the next committee meeting we will be focused on a work plan, and when we can then see exactly where we're going and how quickly we're going to get there.
Thank you, Al. Anything to add to that, Steve, Trevor? Other comments or questions from the rest of committee before we move on the agenda, or is that was a pretty good wrap up, Al? Thank you for that. Okay. All right. And thanks, Trevor, for that presentation. It was nice to just sort of have a recap of the steps and the milestones too. It's been a while since I've looked at all of that, so that was a good refresher. Then we had added, so under new business 10.3, and you had asked for that in regards to actions and next steps, including an inventory. Do you think that's been covered in the previous discussions, or is there more to discuss under that item?
I think it'll actually get covered when Trevor and Steve come back with their work plan, because I'm expecting that work plans will have timeframes, targets, and all of that. So I think that we're good.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. All right. Agenda item 11 is notice of motion. If anyone is wanting to provide notice of motion, now is the time. And I don't see any. There is no closed session. And that takes us to the last item, which is the date of our next regular meeting. I guess the question to staff is how, given the items that we're asking to come back to committee, how much time are you going to need? At the same time, I'll perhaps speak on behalf of the committee in saying that we would, you know, the sooner the better, understanding all of the pressures that you have going on right now. Stephen.
Through you, Madam Chair, based on looking on schedules and stuff, would be the week of September 17th or that Friday would be a perfect time for us to have everything to you guys again. It gives us roughly about 2.5 weeks.
It's the 17th, okay. And now, who's the kayaker or canoeist that goes out on Friday mornings? Bob, is that you or Danuta, or am I thinking of Luke?
No, that was normally me, but they've changed it to Thursdays this year.
Oh, okay. There
I'm
you
all
go.
embarrassed about that.
So, you said the 17th. So that's 3.5 weeks away. Did I hear you correctly, or did you say the 7th, Stephen?
17th would be ideal for us. Give me just a bit more time, just with vacations and stuff.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry, Anne, you have your hand raised. Yep.
You mentioned Luke, and actually the 17th, he will be back on Canadian soil. So he would be able to, I think, attend as well. And just for everybody's awareness, Luke is in the air on his way to Africa right now, and that's why he's not able to attend the meeting.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And I have to say, I certainly miss his presence and his insights at this meeting. So if he can be at the next one, that would be terrific. So Stephen, the 17th, which is a Friday, what time of the day works best for staff?
Just looking at the calendar, it looks like myself and Trevor are wide open.
What about committee members or your other commitments, Deputy Mayor Carlton? Are mornings better? I'm thinking Friday afternoons for staff. Is it nice to get the meeting over with in the morning? What do you think, Brittany?
I would suggest 10 a.m. if I may, as a type of happy medium.
I like it. Is that okay with everybody or for most folks? Okay, 10 a.m. Friday, September 17th. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for all of the information sharing. And I just need now a motion to adjourn. Thanks, Bob. All in favor? Thank you very much. Great meeting. We made it under 2 hours. That's super. Thanks again to staff for coming and taking time out of your busy days. We really appreciate it.